Hey, good morning, everyone. Michael Fanning. This is Warm Up 291, and I listened to a really interesting podcast this morning called Unlocking Us with Brene Brown, and she was interviewing, and I have read it down, David Engelman. And David Engelman wrote a book called Live Wired, 10 years of studying to write this book. And I just put the book on Audible, so I'm really excited to read it. But I want to just pull a few things out of this podcast that I thought were interesting, and it's something that I think can help all of us. So he basically talks about our brain, and we kind of have it backwards when it comes to our brain, and the whole concept of this neuroplasticity, meaning that our brains can change. But what he really says is that our brains are a live, tissue and material that changes by the minute, by the impulses and what we pick up around us, right? And it's constantly changing. So our identity today, who we are today is not who we are tomorrow, right? And who we were when we were 7 is not who we are today, because our brain is continually changing, building new neural pathways. And he calls it, that's why the book's called Live Wired, because we have new circuitry being created every moment. And it's really interesting. And so a lot of times we say, our brain's like a computer, and he says it's not, because, you have a computer, you have software, and you have hardware. And that, when you buy a computer, that's the hardware you get done. And you put a program on it, that's the program you get. And you can put a new program on it, but it's still a program. It doesn't change after that. And so the point being is that our brains really aren't like a computer. Our brains are an organism that is constantly recreating circuitry based on what we take in, right? The stimulus that we take in, which is really interesting. And so a couple things he said in here that I thought were for when I think about coaching, when I think about success, when I think about moving forward in life. The first one was this. He used the term etching. And a lot of times what we'll say is muscle memory. And it was interesting. He said, I don't know why we call it muscle memory, because this isn't a muscle, right? Our brain is, gray matter, tissue, and circuitry. It's not a muscle. But we say muscle memory, but he calls it etching. And what etching is when I do something so often that I get so good at it that I get into what's called automaticity, right? Automaticity. And so he said, it's funny, when he was young and playing baseball, and his coach would say, okay, everybody, I want you thinking out there. And he says, actually, you don't want us thinking. You want us not thinking. You want us to be able to do something so efficiently that we don't have to think about it. So, behind me here are drums. I can sit down at that drum set and play, and I don't think about it. It doesn't take a lot of energy. So what he says is, when we have etching, when we've done something so many times, we've practiced it so many times, it's now automated. It's automaticity, and it requires less energy to do it. But, and I'll talk about one other thing on here when it comes to the drums, but I know that if I sit down at the drums, it's effortless, and actually I feel amazing when I do it. He said that's why when you see professional athletes, right, when they're out there, you think they're exerting so much energy, but really they're not, because their brain, they're not working from their conscious brain, they're working from their non-conscious brain, and it's just been automated. So think about, why do we want you to do things consistently? Why do we want you to have consistent habits? Because you use less energy. It becomes automated, right? So that's one of the things he talked about. The other one is, he said, the power of always learning something new. In fact, they look at the elderly, right? And they look at the elderly that have things like Alzheimer's and those types of things. And what's happened is they've stopped pushing themselves, because he says your brain builds new circuitry all the way until you die. The problem is this, is that as we get older, we stop pushing ourselves. We get into a pattern, right, of, he calls it laziness or procrastination, where we're not consistently pushing ourselves. So for example, if I sit down at the drums, and one of the ways that I can keep my brain young and keep my brain generating new pathways all the time is, I'm a right-handed drummer. But if I sit down at the drum set and I say, no, today I'm going to be a left-handed drummer. And you know what? It's not easy, and it's frustrating, and it's hard, and I can't play it the way that I do the other way. But if I do that enough times, eventually I can become, and so I've been working on that, right? So right hand, left hand, and I get better and better every day. And he says, as soon as you push yourself and you learn something new and you get that into automaticity, go find another thing to learn. Go find another thing to learn. He said, always be learning. Learn every single day. And then the last one on here, he said, is that They also find this, is that one of the ways that we can increase the stimulation in our brain and always make a change is one of the things our brain has the hardest time with is other people, because they're unpredictable. And we really have to create new circuitry when we're interacting with other people or new people. And he said one of the worst things we can do for our brain as we get older is isolation, where we hermit, where we don't want to see people, where we stay alone. And he says one of the best things we can do is to socialize, have a good social network. And so right now you think with what's going on with COVID, it's a little more difficult, but guess what? Zoom is still a social network. Calling somebody on the phone is still a social network. So how many of you are still reaching out and creating those social connections that are so much needed? And also too, think about people in your lives that are the elderly right now. How many of us could help and communicate and engage with some of those people that have been really stuck in isolation? Anyways, those are some things to think about. And then the last thing she asked him, she said, is there just a couple takeaways you can give us? And these are the two things that he said after all of his years of studying, two things that he's changed in his life. Number one, he says he really embraces the new challenges. He will learn something new, and then as soon as he learns it and he gets it down, he moves on to the next thing. So for example, I don't know how many of you guys have been watching the Queen's Gambit, but we all watch that. And so, I went and got a chessboard, and I know how to play chess, but my daughter's learning how to play chess. So I want to get better at it. So I loaded a chess app on my phone, and I find myself learning new moves and doing all those types of things, and it's really, really fun. And so he says, learn something new. I've got guitars hanging on the wall, learning how to play the guitar, those types of things. And then the other one he said is, he called it the Ulysses contract. And this is what he said about this. He said, one of the things that he realizes is that we can predict our behaviors. And we all know that there's behaviors that we have that are not going to benefit us. And we know that we get set up for those behaviors. And the Ulysses contract goes back to, if you remember Ulysses on the boat, and they were going to go past the island of Sirens, and he knew that they sang such beautiful songs that the men would be entranced and the boat would go and land on the rocks. So what did he do? They put beeswax in all the mates' ears, and then Ulysses actually tied himself to the mast so that they couldn't be taken off course. And so what he would do is he was pre-predicting what was going to happen. And so what we do is we think about that. So for example, if you know that if somebody puts ice cream in front of you, you can't say no, you're going to eat it all. So what do? We don't put ice cream in front of us, or we leave ice cream at the grocery store. So if we really want it badly enough, we're going to go get it. And so I want you to think about that. So he says that he thinks about what are going to be his actions that he may take, right? And then in the future, based on what he sets his environment up like. And so those are the types of things that he really dove into. But I would highly recommend you listen to the podcast. I'll put a link to it, right? It's Unlocking Us, and it's David Engelman, and his book is called Live Wired. I would also get the book and download the book or buy the book and read the book, learning more about this thing up here, because this thing up here controls everything about us. And the more we know about it, the better we become. All right, everybody. Hey, make it a great day. Be awesome and help somebody. Talk to you later.